want to choose a weapon to play in Albion Online and you quickly discover there are over 100 different weapons within the game. Every time you ask for advice, you get different answers, which only ends up confusing you even more. And before you even know, you realize that the majority of the weapons are actually viable and being played. Now, isn't that overwhelming? So the thing about that is that many of the weapons are being played because they're meta and really only good in a particular area within the game. But that's probably going to be temporary. The weapons in Albion Online are seeing constant buffs, nerfs and changes, and a good chunk of the player base adapts to that to compete with other players. But doing that is going to ask for many of your resources, which you may not have as a newer player. And honestly, respeccing your fame is one of the biggest mistakes you can make as a player, and it doesn't even matter whether you're new or a veteran player. What is a good idea, however, is having one or maybe a few weapons leveled that are good all around. These are the type of weapons that are viable in many areas within the game and good to have in a lot of the different contents the game has to offer. And those are the type of weapons I will go over in today's video. I've played since the early days and have quite the insight on which weapons have been consistently good through the years, but also which ones picked up in popularity and became one of the superstars among the big number of weapons. Therefore, it shouldn't come as a surprise to any seasoned player that the first weapon on my list is the Permafrost. Now, I don't play mage weapons myself because I'm old and have poor mechanics, but if there is one weapon I've always envied, it's this one. The Permafrost makes for great mobility, a ton of crowd control and really high damage, and all of that in an AoE setting. A well-landed ice crystal can literally decide the outcome of any battle or even wipe an entire horde of enemies. That's how impactful this weapon can be. Given you have to be great at aiming with this weapon and fast in your reaction times, it's just a very strong weapon that's always welcome to any PvE and PvP content as long as it's played in groups. Although you could use it for solo content as well, some of the other Frost weapons simply do a better job at that, but for everything else the Permafrost is where it's at. So if you want to play as a Frost mage with a lot of AoE damage and CC, this weapon might just be the one for you. The second weapon that belongs to this list without doubt is the Bloodletter. If there is one weapon I would have to put at the very top as the best all-rounder, it would definitely be this one. The main reason for that is the fact that it is viable in about any type of content within the game. And on top of that, it's also very strong in all these different contents. From being a top pick for the solo content Corrupted Dungeons, to being a strong addition to any group such as those that roam the roads of Avalon, all the way to the biggest ZVZs where the Bloodletter can execute countless targets. I already made a video explaining that the Bloodletter is the most versatile weapon in the game, and if time proved anything, it's that very statement. You can play the Bloodletter in many different ways across the various content within Albion Online. This weapon has a ton of mobility and a fair amount of damage, with the scariest part being the ultimate that can execute anyone below 40% health. Based on the armor pieces you decide to take with it, you can go from a one-shot assassin all the way to a tanky bruiser. And since the Bloodletter is a one-handed weapon, you can also take an offhand with it and change up your playstyle even more. If the idea of a melee class with a ton of mobility and execution potential sounds like something for you, you may want to try out the Bloodletter. Also check out the video I will link down below, which explains much more about this amazing weapon, whilst also giving some build ideas. Third on the list, we have the light crossbow, which is yet another excellent weapon that has consistently been viable and very strong in many areas within the game. This weapon is mostly known for its strong presence in group content, but ever since the release of the Corrupted Dungeons, it also became very popular there. Just like the Bloodletter, this weapon is also a one-handed weapon, allowing you to take an offhand with it and altering your playstyle based on your wishes. So when solo farming, you could play it with the Crypt Candle to dish out max DPS, and when playing it in a group setting, you could opt to be a bit more tanky by going with a Facebreaker shield. And since I did mention solo farming, I also think the light crossbow is the fastest weapon to clear solo dungeons with. In fact, I have a build dedicated to the light crossbow, which I'm convinced is the best build to clear these dungeons with. If you want a ranged weapon that's viable in about any content and does a really great job at it, you definitely want to check out the light crossbow. It's been played in a lot of competitive content throughout the years for a reason, and now it's time for you to find out why. 4th on the list is one of my favorite weapons, which is the carving sword. I think one of the most satisfying things you can pull off is a slide through an enemy clump and getting your debuff in on as many targets as possible. The animation of this weapon's ultimate is just very awesome. Almost makes you feel like Cloud from Final Fantasy VII whenever you use it. This is yet another melee weapon that's viable in a good range of content within the game. It mostly shines in group content where it's played as a mix of DPS and utility, but it also sees a ton of solo play. The ultimate is a mix of damage, debuff and even mobility, making this weapon pretty mobile. You also work with stacks that you build up through your Q, which makes for even more mobility. As for the W, you have a wide variety of options which each change up your playstyle completely. Therefore, this weapon also is a very versatile one, which you can build in many different ways. In various content, other swords might do a better job, but that doesn't take away from the options you have with the carving sword. If you like the idea of a melee weapon with a fair amount of utility, the carving sword is definitely one that's worth leveling. Then we have the regular bow as the 5th one on the list, which is a weapon that will shred through any target it puts its eyes on. It's definitely one of the scariest weapons to face in a 1 versus 1 because of the sheer damage it makes for, and since it is a ranged weapon with a fair amount of mobility and CC, it can be impossible at times to even get close to it. But not only is it good in solo play, it's also very good in group play, where you single a target out and burst it down as quickly as possible. If you want something that's strong in both solo and small scale, the regular bow is an amazing option. For medium skill fights, other bows do a much better job, and in large scale, the regular bow isn't viable at all. But the effectiveness of this weapon in solo and small scale justifies leveling it, and you will definitely have a lot of wins in those areas. As our 6th weapon on the list, we have the Handed Mace that picked up in popularity at some point and claimed the title of Superstar ever since. This is the only tank weapon in the list, which also sees play as a bruiser with a ton of mobility and CC. You would think it's only viable and strong in group play, but it actually does very well in solo PvP as well. You can build the Handed Mace as both a bruiser and a tank and play it in a wide variety of content from solo all the way to ZVZ. Based on the content you do with it, you can swap your offhand to make yourself more fit for that specific type of content. So for solo play, you may want to go with a mist color for lower cooldowns, whilst for group play, you may want to take a layering cane for bigger CC. If the idea of some damage but mostly mobility and AoE CC sounds like something for you, I would definitely recommend the Handed Mace. Then the 7th and final weapon on the list, which I really think deserves to be here, the Greataxe. Now this weapon has always been amazing for PvE, and despite the 50% nerf on the E ability, it still is a top tier weapon for PvE content. And now with the changes, it's also viable in PvP, and not just in one area, but in many different areas. Since it is also easy to play and doesn't have any skill shots whatsoever, it's also an amazing weapon to pick up for mobile players, but also for any new players who want to start off without having a difficult time. You're simply looking at a weapon with a lot of damage that can't be stopped, whilst also keeping the pressure up through bleeds on enemies. If you want something that's viable from solo all the way to ZVZ, and something that's easy to play compared to many of the other weapons, I would highly recommend the Greataxe. I've already explained a lot about this weapon in a different video, which I will link down below. That video could be especially useful for mobile players who are yet to decide on a weapon. Now, in my opinion, you can't go wrong with any of these 7 weapons. Although they do differ from one another in playstyle and possibilities, all of the weapons mentioned are solid picks that are worth leveling. I'll leave a few videos for you in the description which were mentioned in this video, so if you want to learn more, feel free to check those out. Take care, and I'll see you next time.